Nyasha's tray crashed against the marble floor just as the entire ballroom turned toward her. Gasps rippled beneath the chandeliers. She had only stumbled because someone shoved her from behind, but before she could fall, her body slammed into Tafadzwa Moyo, the untouchable CEO every woman in Harare feared and admired. Her lips struck his for one stolen second. Silence. No one breathed, no one moved, because Tafadzwa Moyo had never allowed a woman to touch him. Nyasha staggered back in horror, already expecting God's humiliation ruin. Instead, Tafadzwa lifted his cold, unreadable eyes to the crowd and said the one thing that shattered the night forever. "I will marry her. Before we go on, tell me honestly, if one accident could change your entire life in a single second, would you run from it, or trust that fate was trying to show you something? And where are you watching from today?" Drop your country and local time in the comments. If you enjoy emotional stories filled with shocking twists, deep secrets, and satisfying justice, subscribe. And stay with me. 3 hours before the kiss that would set Harare on fire, Nyasha was standing in a narrow alley behind the Grand Horizon Hotel, tying to the loose strap of her worn, black serving shoe with a strip torn from an old apron. The alley smelled of wet cement, frying oil, and exhaust fumes. Somewhere beyond the service doors, luxury cars were already arriving one after another, carrying ministers, board members, celebrities, and the kind of wealthy families whose names opened doors before they even stepped out. Inside, chandeliers glowed. Crystal glasses clinked. A string quartet rehearsed under soft golden light. Outside, Nyasha pressed one hand to her stomach and reminded herself not to feel hungry. She had given the last of the bread at home to Mai Rudo that morning. Her mother's medicine had gone up again. The doctor had used gentle words, but Nyasha knew what gentle words meant when poor people were involved. It meant danger wrapped in politeness. It meant, if you cannot pay, we may not be able to continue. Tinashe had pretended not to notice, pretending too hard as he buttoned his faded school shirt. He was a good boy. Too good. That frightened Nyasha sometimes more than anything else. Good children learned too early how cruel the world could be. She had left their one-room house before sunrise, with only one promise in her chest. Tonight's shift mattered. The event manager, a sharp-faced woman named Mrs. Chari, swung open the back door and shouted at the staff to line up. At once the alley snapped into motion. Young men in black jackets straightened their collars. Waitresses adjusted trays and forced smiles onto tired faces. Nyasha rose quickly and joined them, smoothing her uniform over her hips. Mrs. Chari stalked down the line like a general inspecting troops. "Listen carefully," she said. "Tonight is not a wedding. It is not a birthday. It is bigger. This is the Moyo Group Founders Gala. One mistake and security will throw you out before your shadow reaches the front gate. No gossiping, no staring, no touching the guests, especially not him." Everybody knew who him was. Even before Mrs. Chari said the name, a hush moved across the staff. "Tafadzwa Moyo will arrive late. When he does, no one approaches unless spoken to. You keep your eyes respectful, and your distance even more respectful. Do you understand?" A chorus of yeses followed. Nyasha nodded with the others, though she had never seen Tafadzwa Moyo in person. She had only seen him in newspapers wrapped around market tomatoes or on the small television at the neighbor's kiosk when the power worked. The papers called him many things. Africa's youngest untouchable billionaire, the Iceblood CEO, the man who built an empire with one hand and pushed the world away with the other. There were stories about him, whispered, embellished, contradictory. That he had never been seen holding a woman's hand. That he once fired a senior executive for trying to flirt with him during a board dinner. That women chased him and left humiliated. That he had no heart. That he had too much of one and buried it alive. Nyasha had never wasted much thought on rich men and their mystery. Mystery did not pay hospital bills. She followed the other servers into the hotel's service corridor, where steam from the kitchens wrapped around them like a second skin. The noise inside was relentless. Pots clanged, chefs shouted, plates flashed past in white rows. Overhead, the grand ballroom was becoming a world she could smell but not yet see. Roasted meat, butter, imported perfume, fresh flowers, expensive wine. When they were finally allowed onto the floor, the sight almost made Nyasha stop walking. The ballroom looked like a dream, built for people who had never known fear. Gold drapery fell from the ceiling in elegant folds. Massive arrangements of white orchids and deep red roses stood like sculptures between tables dressed in ivory silk. Crystal chandeliers threw warm light over marble floors, polished so brightly they reflected every heel and hem. At the far end of the room, beneath a towering portrait of the company founder, stood a raised stage prepared for speeches and performances. Nyasha lowered her eyes quickly. Wonder was dangerous. Wonder made poor people slow. Table 12 snapped a supervisor. She moved. For the first hour, she worked like a shadow. Refill the glasses, remove the plates. Smile without showing too much feeling. Listen without seeming to hear. That was how people like her survived inside rooms that were not built for them. Invisible when convenient, useful when needed. But invisibility had limits. At table 7 sat the Dlamini family, one of the richest families in the city, dressed in satin diamonds, and practiced contempt. Their daughter, Thandeka Dlamini, drew eyes the moment she entered the room. She was breathtaking in the deliberate way some women became breathtaking when they had been trained from birth to weaponize beauty. Her emerald gown clung like poured silk. Her smile was polished enough to belong in a showroom. Around her hovered a small orbit of friends, admirers, and opportunists. Nyasha noticed her because everyone noticed her. She noticed her again because Thandeka noticed everything. When Nyasha leaned in to replace a glass of sparkling water, Thandeka's eyes slid over her face, paused on the worn seam at her cuff, then moved away with cool boredom. But a few minutes later, Thandeka called her back with a soft flick of the fingers. "You," she said, not looking directly at Nyasha. "Bring me another napkin." "Yes, madam." Nyasha brought it. Then another. Then fresh ice. Then a different glass. Each request was small. Each came with the same lazy tone, the tone of someone who had never had to ask twice because the world had always arranged itself around her. Nyasha obeyed because refusing meant losing the shift. As the ballroom filled, the air changed. More bodyguards appeared near the entrance. More executives checked their phones. A hum of anticipation spread through the guests, subtle at first, then impossible to miss. "He's close," someone whispered near the bar. Across the room, Thandeka straightened in her chair. Her friends leaned in immediately. "Tonight must be the night," one said. "It will be," another giggled. "If he ignores you again, I'll die." Thandeka did not laugh. She looked toward the entrance with the concentration of a hunter watching a trail. Nyasha should have moved away. Instead, she was trapped a few steps behind them, arranging champagne flutes on a tray while pretending not to listen. "He won't ignore me tonight," Thandeka said quietly. There was something in her voice that made Nyasha glance up. Not hope. Determination sharpened into obsession. One of the friends lowered her voice. "Did your mother really arrange for you to be introduced privately?" "Yes," Thandeka said. "Miriam Moyo promised there would be a moment after the chairman's welcome. I only need one opening." Another friend looked nervous. "But what if he humiliates you?" Thandeka's smile returned thin and glittering. "Then I will make sure he regrets it." Nyasha turned away at once. She did not want to know the games of rich women. Games at that level could crush lives below them without even noticing. Still, the words stayed in her mind. A moment later, Mrs. Chari rushed over and shoved a full tray of champagne into Nyasha's hands. "Take this to the central aisle," she hissed. "Stand near the front when Mr. Moyo enters. Guests will want glasses immediately." Nyasha adjusted the weight carefully. The tray was heavy, the stems delicate. Near the front, the room swelled into silence. Then he entered. Tafadzwa Moyo did not stride into the ballroom like other powerful men. He entered with a stillness so absolute that the entire room seemed to bend around it. Tall, severe, dressed in a dark, tailored suit that made him look less like a man attending a gala than a verdict walking into a courtroom, he moved beneath the chandeliers with controlled calm. He acknowledged no one at first. His face was unreadable, cut from restraint. There was no flirtation in him, no social warmth, only focus, only distance. Nyasha felt the shift of the room physically. People smiled too quickly, spines straightened, voices softened. Even laughter became careful. Thandeka rose at once. Nyasha saw it happen almost in pieces. The subtle signal between Thandeka and one of her friends. The friend stepping sideways. A man in staff uniform, not one Nyasha recognized from the regular hotel team, moving too close behind her. The sudden pressure at Nyasha's back, hard, deliberate. Her breath caught. The tray lurched. Crystal tilted. Her foot slipped on the polished floor. She had just enough time to know this was no accident. Then her body flew forward, straight toward Tafadzwa Moyo. The first thing Nyasha heard after the collision was not shouting. It was the sound of glass rolling across marble. One champagne flute spun in a bright circle near Tafadzwa Moyo's polished shoe, trembling on its edge, before collapsing onto its side. Another shattered somewhere behind her. The ballroom had gone so silent that every small sound now felt enormous. Nyasha's palms burned against the floor. Her breath would not come properly. For one horrifying second, she did not even dare lift her head. She could still feel the ghost of impact in her body, the violent push from behind, the helpless pitch forward, the impossible moment when her lips had struck the mouth of the most untouchable man in the room. Then the whispers began. She kissed him. Oh God, security. She's finished. Nyasha pushed herself up on shaking arms and looked straight at Tafadzwa. He had not moved. He stood exactly where the collision had thrown her into him, tall and still. Beneath the chandeliers, his dark suit untouched, except for a thin line of spilled champagne glistening near one cuff. Around him, the bodyguards had tensed, but were waiting. The executives were frozen. At table 7, Thandeka Dlamini had gone pale for a fraction of a second before forcing her face back under control. Nyasha saw all of it at once. The room, the trap, the certainty that whatever happened next would not only destroy tonight, it would destroy her mother's treatment, her brother's schooling, the rent, the little world held together by her hands. She dropped to her knees. "I'm sorry," she whispered, but the words came out cracked and dry. Then louder, because nobody in power ever heard the poor, unless the poor begged. "I am sorry, sir. I did not mean someone pushed me. I would never." A guard stepped forward. Tafadzwa lifted one hand. That single movement stopped the entire room. Nyasha's mouth closed. She stared at him from below, feeling smaller than she had ever felt in her life. His gaze was fixed on her face, not with ordinary anger, not even with disgust. He was looking at her as though something had shifted behind his eyes, and he alone could see it. His stare lowered for one brief second to the chain at her throat. The necklace. It had slipped free when she fell, a small old pendant resting against the dark skin above her collarbone. Nyasha's heart stumbled. Instinctively she grabbed at it, but she was too late. He had already seen. A current passed through his expression. It was so quick that anyone else would have missed it. But Nyasha did not miss it. Shock. Real shock. Then it was gone. Tafadzwa slowly looked up at the guests gathered around him. His voice, when it came, was low and controlled enough to chill the room more than a scream could have. "I will marry her." Silence deepened into something almost supernatural. For one suspended moment, nobody moved because nobody understood language anymore. The sentence had entered the air, but refused to make sense. Nyasha herself thought she had misheard him. Several guests actually turned to one another as if someone else might translate what had just happened into reality. Then the room exploded. What? He's insane. Did he say, marry? Who is she? This is a joke. Nyasha's knees nearly gave way beneath her again. No, she breathed the word escaping before she could stop it. At table 7, Thandeka stood up so sharply her chair scraped the floor. Tafadzwa, she said, trying for a smile and failing. Surely this is not the time for one of your private jokes. He did not even look at her. That slight, deliberate dismissal landed harder than any insult. The chairman of the board, an older man with silver at his temples, stepped forward from the front row. Mr. Moyo, he said carefully, perhaps it would be wise to move this conversation elsewhere. Tafadzwa turned his head at last. Did I sound unclear, Mr. Maseko? No, but then hear me clearly now. This woman will become my wife. The word wife struck the room like a thrown blade. Nyasha could not breathe. Around the ballroom, cameras had already begun to rise. Guests who had come to sip vintage wine and flatter one another were now standing inside the birth of a scandal that would devour the city by morning. Security, uncertain what protocol even existed for this situation, remained stiff and watchful. The quartet had stopped playing. Somewhere near the back, a waiter dropped a tray. Nyasha forced herself upright, though every part of her body begged her to run. Sir, she said, her voice trembling. Please, I think there has been a mistake. Now he looked directly at her. Close-up Tafadzwa Moyo was even more unnerving than he had seemed from across the room. His face was cut with restraint, handsome, in the severe way of a man who had spent years disciplining every visible emotion. Yet something beneath that discipline was moving tonight. Nyasha could feel it. It made her more afraid, not less. There has been no mistake, he said. His tone was not loud, but it left no room for argument. Nyasha swallowed. I am only a waitress. That is your current job, he said, not your full identity. The words hit her strangely, not because of what they meant, because of how he said them, as though he knew something she did not. Before she could ask, another voice sliced between them. This is absurd. Miriam Moyo approached from the front of the ballroom with the elegance of a queen and the eyes of a woman who hated losing control. She was not Tafadzwa's mother by blood, but even Nyasha, who knew little of elite families, recognized her from society magazines. She wore deep gold silk diamonds at her throat and a calm expression that was just a little too polished to be natural. She took in Nyasha's uniform, the broken glass, the cameras, and then turned to Tafadzwa. You cannot make a decision like this in front of half the city. I just did, he said. Miriam lowered her voice. Think about the board. Think about the shareholders. Think about your father. At that, something colder entered Tafadzwa's face. I am. It was a small exchange. To most people it would have meant little. But Nyasha, still trapped in the center of the storm, sensed tension deeper than embarrassment moving beneath the words. Not family disagreement, not social discomfort, history, wounds, power. Thandeka took 3 graceful steps forward and placed herself just near enough to seem involved, just far enough to look dignified. Tafadzwa, she said softly. Everyone can see the poor girl is frightened. Let her go. There's no need to ruin her life further over an accident. Nyasha turned toward her in disbelief. The same woman whose plan had caused this was now speaking as though she were merciful. Tafadzwa finally looked at Thandeka, and his gaze chilled several degrees. Your concern is unnecessary. For the first time that evening, a crack flashed through Thandeka's beautiful composure. Nyasha caught it, So did several people nearby. A mini-climax rippled through the room, not loud, but potent. Something was wrong here beyond scandal. The CEO was not improvising recklessly. He was choosing battle lines. Mrs. Chari, the event manager, suddenly rushed forward and grabbed Nyasha's elbow hard enough to hurt. "Apologize properly," she hissed under her breath, "before they have all of us arrested." Nyasha flinched. Tafadzwa's eyes dropped to the hand gripping her arm. "Remove your hand," he said. Mrs. Chari released Nyasha instantly. It happened so fast that Nyasha barely processed it, but the room did. A poor waitress whom everyone expected to be dragged out was now impossibly under the personal protection of the most feared man present. The balance of shame had shifted, and everyone felt it. Miriam recovered first. "Enough," she said. "We will handle this privately. Tafadzwa, come with me." "No." That single word stopped her. He extended his hand toward Nyasha. Gasps surged again. Even Nyasha stared at the offered hand as if it belonged to another reality. This was the man who reportedly recoiled from female contact. The man who had built a legend around distance. Yet here he was waiting. "I do not repeat myself often," he said. Nyasha looked at his hand, then at his face. This was madness. If she took it, she stepped into a world that could swallow her whole. If she refused, she might still be crushed. But without learning why this was happening. Why he had stared at her necklace as if he had seen a ghost. Why certain people in the room suddenly looked afraid instead of amused. Her fingers curled around the pendant at her throat. "My Rudo needs medicine. Tinash needs school fees. Think, survive first, understand later." Slowly Nyasha placed her trembling hand in his. Another silence fell. His grip was firm but careful, controlled, as if even now touching her cost him something he refused to show. He turned to the room. "The gala is over." But the chairman's address someone began. "It is over," Tafadzwa repeated. No one challenged him again. He led Nyasha through the parted crowd, every eye following them. Some faces held disbelief, others contempt. Some already glittered with the thrill of gossip. Near the center aisle, Nyasha caught Thandeka's stare and saw something raw there, now rage stripped of elegance. Beside her, Miriam's expression remained composed, but her jaw had tightened. They knew something, or feared something. As Tafadzwa guided Nyasha toward the private exit, flashes from phones burst around them like tiny explosions. Tomorrow, the city would wake hungry, and this story would feed it. The poor waitress, the untouchable CEO, the stolen kiss, the instant marriage. At the edge of the ballroom, Nyasha found her voice one last time. Why, she whispered. He did not slow, but after a long second he answered without looking at her. "Because the moment I saw that necklace, he said you stopped being a stranger." Nyasha's blood ran cold. The doors opened, and together they stepped out of the ballroom and into the beginning of a war neither of them could yet fully see. By the time Tafadzwa's black car slid through the iron gates of the Moyo estate, Harare had already begun to tear the story apart. Phones would be ringing across the city. Family groups would be exploding with voice notes. Socialites would be calling journalists they pretended not to know. Board members would be drinking late and calculating risk. By sunrise, every version of the story except the true one would be alive. Nyasha sat rigid in the back seat, her hands locked together so tightly her knuckles hurt. Across from her, Tafadzwa said almost nothing. The low city lights moved over his face in passing bands, gold, shadow, gold again, making him look less like a husband and more like a man escorting a secret through enemy territory. She had asked him twice on the drive to explain the necklace. He had answered neither time. The estate gates closed behind them with the heavy finality of a prison. Nyasha had never seen wealth arranged with such quiet confidence. The Moyo residence did not scream luxury the way the ballroom had. It did something worse. It assumed it. The main house rose beyond a long stone drive, lined with jacaranda trees and sculpted hedges, its dark glass and pale stone glowing under discreet ground lights. Water spilled in sheets from a black granite fountain. Security cameras turned almost invisibly at the corners. Even the silence felt expensive. A row of household staff waited beneath the entrance canopy. Not smiling, not welcoming, watching. Nyasha stepped out of the car and immediately felt the difference between being a guest and being an intrusion. A woman in a crisp navy uniform lowered her gaze, just enough to appear respectful, but not enough to hide her judgment. Two male attendants exchanged a glance. At the top of the steps stood an older woman with graceful posture, silver-threaded hair wrapped neatly, and the kind of expression that never wasted itself on surprise. This was not a home preparing to receive a bride. It was a fortress adjusting to an unexpected breach. Tafadzwa climbed the steps without offering explanation to anyone. Nyasha followed because standing still would have been worse. The older woman inclined her head. "Mr. Moyo." "Chipo," he said. "Prepare the east wing." A pause. "The east wing, sir," she repeated. "Yes." Nyasha felt the reaction pass through the line of staff before anyone dared show it openly. Whatever the east wing meant, it mattered. Chipo's eyes flickered to Nyasha for one brief second. "As you wish." They entered through doors taller than the walls of Nyasha's entire house. Inside, the air smelled faintly of cedar-polished stone and something floral so subtle it felt designed not to be noticed. The entrance hall rose 2 stories under a sweeping modern chandelier. Large abstract paintings hung in measured symmetry. A staircase curved upward like sculpture. Not one object was misplaced. Not one cushion was crooked. The whole house seemed built around the same principle as the man who owned it control at all costs. Nyasha stopped near the center of the hall. "Tafadzwa," she said quietly, because the emptiness around them made normal volume feel disrespectful. "I need answers now." He removed his cufflinks with slow precision, as though she had asked him to comment on the weather. "You will have some answers," he said. "Not all of them tonight. That is not fair." His gaze met hers. "Fairness has very little to do with what is happening." The words stung because they were true. Nyasha lifted her chin anyway. "Then let me ask differently. Why did you marry me?" A muscle moved once in his jaw. "Because leaving you in that ballroom would have placed you in immediate danger." "Danger from whom?" "From people who smile well in public." Nyasha stared at him. "That is not an answer. It is the first honest one you've been given tonight." He turned and began walking toward a side corridor. For one hot second, anger overpowered fear. Nyasha followed him. "You cannot drag me into your house, declare me your wife in front of half the city, and then talk to me in riddles." At that he stopped. The silence between them tightened. When Tafadzwa looked back, there was no open rage in him. That would have been easier to understand. What he carried instead was restraint so severe it bordered on violence against himself. "I can," he said. And I did. Nyasha flinched, then hated herself for it. Something in his face shifted at once, not softer exactly, but aware. He had seen her fear. He had not wanted to. That realization confused her more than his coldness. Before either of them could speak again, another voice entered the hall. "So it is true." Elias Moyo descended the staircase with the measured dignity of a man who had long ago learned how to wear power, even when tired. He was older than Tafadzwa, broader through the shoulders, his face marked by age and executive caution rather than warmth. He did not rush. Men like him never rushed. The world usually waited. His eyes moved from Tafadzwa to Nyasha and back again. "I was told my son had ended the Founders' Gala by acquiring a wife," he said. I hoped the phrasing was exaggerated. "It was accurate," Tafadzwa replied. Elias came to the last step, and studied Nyasha with a look that was not cruel but not kind either. It was the look of a man scanning a balance sheet for hidden liabilities. "What is your name, Nyasha?" she said. "Sir." He nodded once. "And do you understand what my son has done tonight?" "No," she said honestly. "I do not." That answer seemed to interest him more than any practiced politeness would have. From the far archway, soft footsteps approached. Miriam entered the hall in a different gown from the gala, but with the same polished self-command. If the scandal had unsettled her, she wore the disturbance beautifully. Diamonds were gone now. Silk remained. Her smile appeared exactly on time. "Elias," she said, "we should all be careful not to overwhelm the girl. This has been an emotional evening." Nyasha felt it instantly, the false softness, the careful placement of sympathy, the performance of civility over hidden steel. Miriam did not look at her like a person. She looked at her like a complication requiring elegant disposal. Tafadzwa's voice cooled further. "She is not a girl." Miriam's smile did not break. "Of course. My apologies." But the apology did not reach her eyes. Elias folded his hands behind his back. "I assume there is a reason for this spectacle beyond rebellion." "A reason exists," Tafadzwa said. "And would you care to share it with your family?" "Not yet." Miriam gave a soft laugh, almost maternal. "You see, this is exactly why we must slow down. The media can be managed. Legal paperwork can be delayed. An unfortunate statement at a gala does not need to become a permanent stain." Nyasha turned to her sharply. "He called me his wife." Miriam's expression shifted by 1 degree. "And men under stress sometimes speak dramatically." "He does not," Elias said quietly. The room stilled. It was the first thing anyone had said that sounded like belief in Tafadzwa rather than management of him. Nyasha looked from father to son and felt the old wounds she did not yet understand, moving silently between them. Tafadzwa spoke without taking his eyes off Miriam. "The marriage will proceed legally tonight." Even Elias's brows moved at that. Miriam's control tightened. "That is impossible." "It is inconvenient," Tafadzwa corrected. "Not impossible." Nyasha's pulse thudded in her throat. "Tonight?" He looked at her at last. Yes. Everything inside her recoiled. The ballroom had been shock. This was reality arriving step by step, each footfall colder than the last. "I have not agreed," she said. Nobody had expected her to say it aloud. Chippo, standing in the shadows beyond the arch, glanced up. Elias went still. Miriam's eyes sharpened with sudden interest, as if she had just discovered the maid could bite. Tafadzwa faced her fully. "Then say no," he said. The challenge in it was quiet but unmistakable. Nyasha opened her mouth and found nothing ready, because no lived inside her. Of course it did. This was absurd, dangerous, violent in its speed. But outside these walls waited the people who had pushed her, trapped her, and possibly meant worse. Inside these walls stood the only man who seemed to know why the necklace around her throat mattered. And he had just told her in front of his father and stepmother that she could refuse. That should have made her feel safe. Instead, it made everything more complicated. "Why did you look at my necklace like that?" she asked. Miriam went still again, not visibly enough for most people to catch it, but Nyasha caught it. Tafadzwa caught it too. For one brief second, something dangerous passed through the room like a hidden wire sparking behind the walls. Elias's gaze shifted to the pendant at Nyasha's throat. What necklace? What? Instinctively, Nyasha stepped back. Her fingers closed around the old pendant. It was worn smooth in places from years of touch, the only object she had owned long enough to think of as permanent. Mai Rudo had always said Nyasha had been wearing it when she was found as a child. Nothing more, nothing less. Tafadzwa answered before anyone else could. One connected to my mother. The words dropped like stones into deep water. Nyasha felt her stomach turn. Elias's face changed first, not into recognition, but into the strained focus of a man assembling impossible memories. Miriam changed second, and more dangerously. Her expression remained composed, but every softness drained from it, leaving behind something colder than politeness. So that was it. Not romance, not scandal, not madness. A secret. A very old one. Nyasha looked at Tafadzwa differently now. The legend of the untouchable CEO cracked just enough for her to glimpse the wound beneath it. This was not a man who avoided women out of arrogance. This was a man who had spent years living beside poison and learning not to touch anything that might carry it. As if in answer to that thought, Chippo stepped forward from the shadows. "The east wing is ready, sir." Tafadzwa did not break eye contact with Miriam. "Good." Then to Nyasha, quieter. "You will stay there." Miriam let out a low breath. "That wing has been closed since my mother died." Tafadzwa finished. The temperature of the room seemed to drop. Elias said nothing. Nyasha barely breathed. Now even the house itself felt like part of the mystery-sealed room's dead women. Necklaces a marriage announced like a counter-attack. Tafadzwa moved toward the corridor again, then stopped beside Nyasha without touching her. "Whatever you think this house is," he said, "so only she could hear it is more dangerous than that. Lock your door tonight. Open it for no one except me." Nyasha turned toward him, startled. Before she could ask why, he walked away, and for the first time since the kiss, Nyasha understood something with terrifying clarity. The man who never touched any woman was not only protecting himself from the world, he was protecting certain women from the world inside his own home. Not sleep. The east wing of the Moyo estate was quieter than any place she had ever known, and that silence unnerved her more than noise. Poor neighborhoods never truly slept. Somewhere a radio argued with the dark, somewhere a baby cried, somewhere dogs barked or metal gates groaned, or someone laughed too loudly because tomorrow was too uncertain to save joy for daylight. Silence belonged to places rich enough to control every disturbance. Here silence felt curated. Her room was larger than the house where Mai Rudo and Tinashe slept. Pale walls, dark wood, a bed dressed in cream linen, a private sitting area. A marble bathroom that looked like a luxury hotel. Fresh flowers stood on a side table. A folded robe lay at the foot of the bed. Even the lamps seemed expensive in a way Nyasha did not know how to name. None of it comforted her. Tafadzwa's warning kept circling in her mind. "Lock your door tonight. Open it for no one except me." She had obeyed at once. Then she had checked the lock 3 more times. Now, long past midnight, she sat on the edge of the bed, still wearing the same dress from the gala. Her shoes abandoned near the door, the pendant in her hand. She rubbed her thumb over the worn metal as if it might finally surrender an answer after all these years. Mai Rudo had never liked questions about it. Not exactly refused, just closed down around them. "You were wearing it when I found you, my child." That was the line, always the same line. Found where, by whom, why alone? Why with no papers, no blanket, no name from any family searching for her? Those questions had floated at the edges of Nyasha's childhood, like shadows she learned not to step into. Poor people did not always have the luxury of investigating the past. Survival demanded attention from the present. But tonight the past had kicked the door open. A soft sound outside the room made her freeze. Footsteps. Measured. Slow. Nyasha held her breath. The steps stopped beyond the door. For one sick moment she imagined Miriam standing outside with that elegant smile and murder hidden behind it. Then the sound moved on. A servant. A guard. Someone checking whether the unexpected bride was asleep. Her skin prickled. She did not realize how tense she was until the first knock came, 2 light taps, careful, almost apologetic. She jolted upright. "Who is it?" she called, hating the tremor in her voice. Chippo came the answer. "I brought tea." Nyasha hesitated. Chippo had been unreadable downstairs. Calm observant, one of those women who made even stillness feel deliberate. But she had not seemed openly hostile. "I'm not thirsty." A pause. Then Chippo spoke again, lower this time. "Drink or don't drink it. That part is your choice. But if I were you, I would not remain hungry in this house out of pride." Nyasha stood slowly and approached the door but did not unlock it. "Why are you helping me?" Another pause. Longer now. At this moment Chippo said, "I have not decided whether I am." Nyasha frowned. There was no sound of movement, only the faint clink of china being set down outside. Then Chippo's footsteps retreated down the corridor. Nyasha opened the door only after counting to 20. A silver tray waited on the floor, tea, a small plate of buttered bread, sliced fruit. No note, no poison, she hoped. She stared at it for a long moment before lifting it inside. Hunger eventually defeated suspicion. Not fully, just enough. The tea was still warm. That frightened her too. Morning came grey and cool through the tall windows. Nyasha had barely changed into one of the modest dresses left in the room wardrobe, someone's hurried attempt to make her look less like herself and more like the house, when a knock sounded again. This time it was Tafadzwa. She knew before he spoke. "Open the door." No one else in that house used words like commands carved from stone. Nyasha unlocked it. He stood outside in a charcoal suit, already dressed for war disguised as business, his face composed and unreadable. Only his eyes gave him away this morning. He looked like a man who had slept even less than she had. "You should have rested," he said. Nyasha nearly laughed at the absurdity. "You bring me into a house full of people who want me gone, warn me to lock my door, tell me my necklace is linked to your dead mother, and now you're surprised I did not sleep." A flicker crossed his expression. Not offense. Recognition. "Come," he said. "We are leaving. For where my lawyer's office." Her throat tightened. "So you meant it? You really intend to make this legal?" "Yes." Nyasha crossed her arms. "And if I refuse?" He looked at her for a moment too long. "You still can." The answer should have relieved her. Instead, it agitated something deeper, because there was no pressure in his tone. No manipulation, just certainty, and beneath it something more dangerous than force trust, that she would walk toward the truth, even if it hurt. Nyasha stepped into the corridor and closed the door behind her. As they walked through the east wing, she noticed details she had missed the night before. Framed photographs had been removed from the walls, but faint square shadows remained where they had once hung. One carved table stood beneath a dustless mirror, as if the wing had been maintained in secret even while declared closed. At the end of the hall, sunlight fell across a locked white door fitted with an older brass handle than the others. Nyasha slowed. "What room is that?" Tafadzwa did not stop walking. "My mother's." "Why is it locked?" His voice lowered. "Because some grief turns into evidence if no one is allowed to clean it away." The sentence hit her like cold water. Before she could ask more, they turned into the main hall and walked straight into Miriam. Of course. She stood beside the breakfast room entrance, wearing pale ivory and pearls, every inch the respectable widow of power, though Elias Moyo was very much alive. 2 staff members hovered discreetly behind her. "Good morning," she said, smiling at Nyasha with painful grace. "I had hoped we might share breakfast properly. It is unfortunate to begin family life in such confusion." Nyasha knew a trap when she heard one dressed as kindness. "Thank you, but Mr. Moyo says we are leaving." Tafadzwa says many things when emotionally provoked. His gaze hardened. I am not provoked. Miriam turned to him with smooth patience. You ended a gala, humiliated several powerful families, and installed a waitress in the East Wing. What would you call it? Corrective action? For one razor-thin second, Miriam's smile tightened. Nyasha saw it. So did he. Another mini-climax, silent but sharp, passed between them. This was no longer only about the necklace. Tafadzwa was positioning her in places that meant something. The East Wing, the lawyer, legality, visibility. Every move prevented her from quietly disappearing. Miriam's attention shifted back to Nyasha. My dear, men in this family often confuse protection with control. You should be cautious of promises made too quickly. Nyasha met her gaze. I am cautious of many things this morning. The answer surprised all three of them. Miriam recovered first. Good. Then perhaps you are wiser than you look. Tafadzwa stepped between them, not dramatically, just enough to block the line of Miriam's smile from landing directly on Nyasha. That will be all. Miriam's eyes cooled. Will it? Then she turned to the servants behind her. See that the guest from the East Wing is provided with suitable clothing, a phone, and whatever she requires. Guest from the East Wing, not bride, not family, not Nyasha. The phrase was a blade wrapped in silk. Tafadzwa said nothing until they had reached the car again. Only when the gates opened and the city swallowed them did he speak. She will try kindness before cruelty. Do not mistake one for the absence of the other. Nyasha turned to him sharply. Then stop speaking as if I am blind. Tell me what she did. His jaw tensed. I said my mother's death involved betrayal. That betrayal did not come from one place. That is still not enough. No. The honesty of that one word disarmed her. He looked out the window for a long moment, then said, When I was 11, my mother became convinced a child had been taken from someone under this family's protection. She kept records, notes, names. She said the truth was buried between hospital walls and company money. A week later, she was dead in what everyone called an accident. Nyasha's breath caught. He continued with brutal control. Years later, most of her papers disappeared, except references to one missing item. A pendant. Distinctive. Old. Last seen on the child she believed had been hidden. Nyasha's fingers flew to the necklace at her throat. The world outside the car blurred. No, she whispered. That can't be. It can. She could have been mistaken. She rarely was. Nyasha stared at him. And you married me because you think I am that child. I married you, he said, because after the kiss, certain people in that ballroom stopped looking scandalized and started looking afraid. That answer was even worse than the first. It meant danger had not begun at the estate. It had begun the moment powerful people saw the pendant. Nyasha swallowed hard. If this is true, then who am I? For the first time since she had met him, Tafadzwa's face changed not into coldness, but into something almost painfully human. I do not know yet, he said. Then, after a pause, but I think someone spent many years making sure you would never ours. The lawyer's office occupied the top floor of a glass building downtown. By the time they arrived, a television mounted in the reception area was already running the story. Nyasha saw her own face on screen beside Tafadzwa's, frozen in the aftermath of the ballroom disaster, her mouth parted in horror, while the scrolling banner beneath declared, Untouchable. CEO 2, Marry Mystery. Waitress after stolen kiss. Mystery waitress. The phrase burned. A receptionist hurried them into a private conference room. Legal documents lay ready on polished wood. Pens had been aligned exactly. The efficiency of it made Nyasha's pulse hammer. Tafadzwa did not sit. Neither did she. What happens after this? Nyasha asked. He looked at her steadily. After this, anyone who wants to remove you will need a better plan than public humiliation. That was when the door opened again, and Elias Moyo walked in with a file in his hand and a face gone harder than stone. I thought he said, placing the file on the table, "You both should see this before anyone signs anything." Nyasha's stomach dropped, because whatever was inside that file had frightened even him. The air in the conference room changed the moment Elias Moyo set the file on the table. Until then, the morning had felt like a storm moving in one direction, fast, violent, but still somewhat controllable. Legal papers, timetables, security, strategy. But the file in Elias's hand brought something else into the room. Memory. And memory, Nyasha was beginning to understand, was more dangerous than scandal. The lawyer, a lean older man named Mr. Bavuma, rose halfway from his chair and then sat back down when he recognized the expression on Elias's face. He had likely expected a difficult family conversation. He had not expected history to walk in carrying evidence. Tafadzwa's voice was flat. "What is it?" Elias did not answer at once. He looked at Nyasha first, not coldly this time, but with the gravity of a man realizing that events had already gone too far to preserve comfort. "I spent the night making calls I should have made years ago," he said. "I asked for archived records from the company clinic and from St. Augustine Private Hospital. Most of what I requested no longer officially exists." Nyasha's skin prickled. "No longer exists?" she asked. Elias met her eyes. "Deleted, altered, misfiled. Pick the cleanest word. It changes nothing." He opened the file. Inside were photocopies, handwritten notes, what looked like old internal memos, and one faded photograph paper-clipped to the top corner of a typed report. Nyasha leaned forward before she could stop herself. Tafadzwa took the first page. His expression did not visibly change, but Nyasha saw his thumb press once hard against the paper's edge. "What am I looking at?" she asked. Elias answered without embellishment. "A report filed 18 years ago by a nurse from St. Augustine. It refers to a female child delivered under emergency circumstances, then removed from the maternity ward under unauthorized instruction before identity confirmation was completed." Nyasha felt something drop through her body. "A child," she said. "Me. We do not know that yet," Elias replied. "But the date corresponds with the same week my late wife began documenting irregular payments between the hospital and a subsidiary tied to Moyo Group Logistics." Tafadzwa looked up sharply. "A subsidiary?" "Yes." "Which one?" Elias hesitated. That hesitation told its own story. "Makoni Community Holdings," he said at last. Tafadzwa went utterly still. Nyasha looked between them. "What does that mean?" Tafadzwa answered this time. "It means the payments were hidden under a charitable vehicle, small enough not to trigger normal suspicion, noble enough to avoid scrutiny." Mr. Bavuma adjusted his glasses. "If the records are genuine, then whoever orchestrated this expected no one to compare hospital movement against company charity disbursements." Nyasha stared at the papers but could no longer really see them. Everything inside her had become a pounding blur, taken from a maternity ward, unauthorized instruction, altered records, a child. Her hand moved instinctively to the pendant at her throat. Elias noticed. "There's more." He slid the photograph across the table. It showed a woman in a hospital bed, exhausted, dark-skinned, beautiful, in the fragile way of someone who had just fought death, and won only temporarily. She was holding a newborn wrapped in a pale cloth. Beside the woman stood a nurse whose face had been partly damaged by time and bad storage. But around the infant's tiny neck, Nyasha stopped breathing. A miniature chain, a pendant, the same shape, the same worn curve. Her fingers closed so hard around the necklace at her throat that pain shot into her palm. "No," she whispered. No. Tafadzwa took the photograph, and for the first time since Nyasha had known him, all restraint vanished from his eyes. Not outwardly. He did not shout. He did not slam the table, but the force of his focus became almost unbearable. That pendant, he said. Elias nodded once. It matches. Nyasha tried to speak and failed. Mr. Boomer, perhaps sensing the room tilting toward collapse, said gently, "This photograph alone is not legal proof of identity, but it strongly supports the possibility that the necklace was placed intentionally with the child from birth." "Who is the woman in the bed?" Nyasha asked. Elias looked older when he answered. "That page is missing. Missing." The photograph was found clipped to a patient transfer note. The name section was torn away. Tafadzwa's mouth hardened. "Convenient." "Yes," Elias said quietly. "Far too convenient." The silence that followed felt raw. Then Nyasha straightened. No more confusion, no more drifting helplessly between powerful people and their fragments of truth. She was tired of being the object in other people's files. "Tell me everything you are still not saying," she said. Her voice shook, but it did not break. Tafadzwa's gaze shifted to her. Elias, too. Even the lawyer sat back. Nyasha went on. "I was pushed into you on purpose. Powerful people were afraid when they saw this necklace. Your mother died after investigating a missing child. Someone tampered with records, and now I am standing in a lawyer's office while the city calls me a mystery waitress. So stop choosing which pieces I can handle. Tell me everything." It was the first time she had spoken into the center of the storm instead of from its edge. A faint change moved through Tafadzwa's face. Not softness, not yet, but respect, sharpened by necessity. He looked at Elias. "She stays informed from this point forward." Elias exhaled slowly. "Agreed." Then he said the name that cracked the room open. "Simbagwedu." Nyasha frowned. "The board member." "Yes," Elias said. "Today he is a board member. 18 years ago he was a rising operations director overseeing logistics linked to our medical charity channels. He later developed close ties with Miriam." Tafadzwa's expression darkened. "How close? Close enough to sign documents for one another during off-record transactions." Mr. Bavuma added, "And close enough to bury them later, apparently." Nyasha thought of the ballroom, the polished smiles, the measured voices. Suddenly, Simbagwedu's face from the gala returned to her. How quickly he had moved to suggest handling things privately. How eager he had seemed to control the situation once Tafadzwa announced the marriage. He had not been shocked. He had been alarmed. A hard knock sounded on the conference room door. Everyone turned. Before Mr. Bavumas could answer, the door opened, and Thandeka Dlamini entered with the confidence of someone accustomed to entering rooms where she had not been invited. She wore dark glasses pushed up into perfect hair, a cream suit, and the expression of a woman rehearsing concern. "Forgive the interruption," she said. "I was told Tafadzwa was here." Nyasha stared. Of all the people who could have walked through that door, Thandeka was the one face she least wanted to see. Tafadzwa did not invite her further in. "Who told you?" Thandeka smiled slightly. "The city speaks fast after a scandal." Then perhaps the city should learn discretion. That should have pushed her back. It did not. Instead, her gaze drifted to Nyasha, taking in the dress, the pendant. The lack of makeup, the clear exhaustion. The smile that followed was almost kind. Almost. "I came because I feared this poor girl might be overwhelmed by all of this attention," Thandeka said. "These things can destroy people who aren't prepared." Nyasha saw it immediately now, the performance. Last night, Thandeka had hidden the blade more carefully. Today, the silk around it was thinner. "You mean people like me?" Nyasha said. Thandeka turned, brows lifting, as though surprised Nyasha had spoken. "I mean people with no understanding of what powerful men do when they need a distraction." The room chilled. Mini-climax. There it was not accusation, but insinuation. Not direct attack, but poison released into the air for others to breathe. Tafadzwa stepped toward her. "Leave." Thandeka did not move. Instead, she tilted her head. "You're making a mistake. Your mother would never have wanted this." For the first time that morning, Tafadzwa's control nearly cracked. "Do not speak about my mother." The force in his voice made even Mr. Bavuma stiffen. Thandeka faltered just once, just enough. Nyasha saw fear flash beneath the beauty. "Good," she thought, suddenly fiercely. "Let her feel some." But Thandeka recovered quickly and reached into her handbag. "I didn't come empty-handed," she said. She placed a glossy folder on the table. "Since everyone is so interested in truth, perhaps this will help." Tafadzwa did not touch it. Elias did. Inside were printed photographs. Nyasha's blood went cold. There she was captured from hotel security angles in the service corridor before the gala. One image showed her speaking to a man in staff uniform. Another showed her standing near a utility door, while that same man leaned close as if whispering to her. A third showed her adjusting her apron while he handed her something blurred by motion. "I don't understand," Nyasha breathed. Thandeka sighed softly, the sound almost compassionate. "The hotel has excellent cameras. It seems your wife met privately with someone before she fell into you, Tafadzwa." Nyasha looked again, and memory slammed into place. The man in the photos. Not hotel staff. She had seen him only briefly near the service corridor. He had asked where the tray station was. She had pointed. That was all. Of course, Thandeka said, cutting across her smoothly. Maybe it was innocent. Maybe the kiss was planned. Maybe the marriage is the most successful trap in the city. Tafadzwa's eyes moved to Nyasha. Not accusing. Assessing. That hurt more. Nyasha took a step forward. "She's lying by arrangement, not by words. The photos are real, but the story is false." Thandeka smiled. "Then explain the man." "I can't. Not yet." "A tragic weakness." Tafadzwa picked up one of the photos at last. His face became unreadable again. That terrified Nyasha, because in that instant she remembered what Part 4 had begun to teach her. Tafadzwa did not explode when he was most angry. He became colder, quieter, more dangerous. Elias looked from the photographs to Thandeka. "Where did you get these?" She hesitated only slightly. Concerned parties shared them. Concerned parties, meaning Miriam, meaning Simba, meaning the network tightening. Tafadzwa set the photograph down with surgical precision. "Get out," he said. This time Thandeka obeyed. At the door, she turned once more toward Nyasha. "Be careful," she said softly. "Men like him never marry for love." Then she left. Silence remained like smoke after a fire. Nyasha could barely feel her hands. The photographs lay on the table between them like a fresh wound. And though she had told the truth, she could see the new danger clearly now, for the first time since the kiss. Suspicion had entered the room from more than one side. For several long seconds after Thandeka left, no one in the conference room spoke. The photographs remained scattered across the polished table like small, vicious truths, real images carrying a false story. Nyasha stared at them until her vision blurred. She hated how effective they were. That was how powerful people worked when they wanted to destroy someone poor. They did not need to invent everything. They only needed a few stolen angles, a few carefully framed moments, and the confidence that no one would bother asking for the rest. Mr. Bavuma was the first to break the silence. "These images will spread," he said quietly. "If they have reached Miss Dlamini, they have likely reached others." Elias looked grim. "Then the timing is deliberate." "It always is," Tafadzwa said. His voice was calm again. Too calm. Nyasha had already begun to recognize that tone. The colder he sounded, the more dangerous the situation truly was. She turned toward him, the ache in her chest rising fast. "You looked at me when she said it." His gaze shifted to her. "You looked at me," Nyasha repeated, forcing the words through her tightening throat, as if you were measuring whether she might be right. Tafadzwa's face did not move. "I was measuring the photographs. That is not the same thing." "No," he said, "it is not." Something inside her gave way. All morning she had held herself together through shock, fear, suspicion, and the unbearable weight of being told her life might be built on a lie. But this subtle distance in his eyes after everything cut differently. Because against all reason, some fragile part of her had believed he would know, that he of all people would see the trap when it came. Instead, he had assessed, calculated, protected the situation before protecting her. Nyasha stepped back from the table. "I want to leave." Mr. Bavuma stiffened. Elias said nothing. Tafadzwa's expression sharpened by 1 degree. "Not now." She laughed once softly in disbelief. "You do not get to decide that every time. You are not safe outside this room. I am not safe inside it either." That landed. The truth of it hung in the air, raw and embarrassing. Nyasha looked at Elias. "You brought evidence that my whole life may have been stolen from me. Then that woman walks in with photographs meant to make me look like a liar, and no one can even explain who pushed me last night." "Tell me why I should stay," Elias answered carefully. "Because someone is moving faster than we expected." Tafadzwa spoke over him. "Because the second you leave our protection, they will try something worse than photographs." Nyasha turned on him. "And what exactly is our protection, Tafadzwa? A legal contract. A locked wing in a house full of secrets. A marriage you announced before asking whether I wanted one." For the first time that day, anger flashed openly in his eyes. "You think I do not know this is brutal. I think you know. And do it anyway." His jaw tightened. Mini-climax. Mr. Bavuma shifted as if prepared to intervene. Elias watched both of them with the exhausted focus of a man witnessing 2 people wound each other while the real enemy waited elsewhere. Tafadzwa spoke first, each word clipped. "I married you because the moment you hit me, and that necklace became visible, Miriam, Simba, and at least 2 others in that ballroom changed. Not socially, strategically. They stopped seeing scandal and started seeing risk. That meant they recognized something. That meant if I allowed you to be dragged away as a disposable waitress, you could disappear before morning." Nyasha held his gaze, refusing to look away even as her chest tightened. "You could have told me that plainly." "I am telling you now. Too late." The words came out harsher than she intended. They struck him anyway. For a second, neither of them moved. Then Tafadzwa looked down at the photographs and said more quietly, "Not too late." Nyasha wished he had shouted. She wished he had become cruel. That would have been easier to fight. But the restraint in him and the hint of regret beneath it only made everything messier. Elias closed the file. "Arguing about timing won't help us. The question is who planted the man in the service corridor." "I saw him," Nyasha said. "Only briefly. He asked for directions." "To a tray station?" Tafadzwa asked. "Yes." "And did he touch you?" She frowned, searching memory. I don't think so." "No, but when I turned away, he was still behind me somewhere." Tafadzwa nodded once. "Then the photographs were taken to imply conspiracy, not document it," Mr. Bavuma added. "Which means someone had cameras ready before the incident." Nyasha went cold. That detail changed everything. Not opportunism, then. Preparation. Someone had expected the trap to happen. Someone had planned not only the push, but the story that would follow. Elias stood. "We need the original hotel security chain and staff logs before they vanish." "I already requested them," Tafadzwa said. Elias gave him a long look. And they delayed. meaning someone higher than the hotel manager told them to delay. Nyasha pressed her fingers against the edge of the table until the wood bit into her skin. "This never ends, does it?" she whispered. "Every answer opens another hand around my throat." Tafadzwa turned to her then, and whatever he saw in her face seemed to alter something in his own. "Come with me." She almost refused out of pure exhaustion. Instead, perhaps because she was too tired to invent another defense, she followed him out of the conference room and down a private corridor lined with glass overlooking the city. Harare spread beneath them in bright, midday haze. Traffic towers, construction cranes, crowded streets, distant tin roofs flashing in the sun. From this height, the city looked unified. That was the lie of distance. Up close, everything fractured. Tafadzwa stopped near the window. Behind them, the hallway was empty. Nyasha folded her arms. What now? For a moment, he said nothing. Then he removed his watch, set it on the windowsill, and loosened his tie slightly, as though even that small release cost him effort. "When I was a child," he said, still looking at the city, "people described my mother as gentle. That was because they did not know what courage looks like when it smiles." Nyasha stayed silent. She was not naive. She understood exactly how men like Simba protected themselves. She knew that women like Miriam could destroy reputations while keeping their own hands clean. And near the end of her life, she became convinced a child had been taken and hidden because that child's existence threatened a line of inheritance. Nyasha's heartbeat quickened. "You think I threaten someone's inheritance? I think your existence threatens a story. Powerful people have been living comfortably inside for years." He finally turned toward her. "The night my mother died, she told me something I did not understand then. She said, if they cannot erase the blood, they will erase the name." The words sank deep. Nyasha whispered, "And you think that happened to me?" "Yes." She swallowed hard. "Then why the tests? Why the secrecy? Why not just tell me from the beginning that you suspected this?" His face tightened. There was no easy answer in him, only an honest, ugly one. "Because suspicion is not proof. Because people have lied to me with beautiful eyes and steady voices before. Because the last time I trusted too quickly, my mother died, and everyone around me learned how to call it fate." Nyasha felt the force of that more than she wanted to. He continued lower now. "And because when you kissed me, I didn't kiss you. I fell into you. A distinction the ballroom does not care about," he said. "But in that second, before I understood anything else, I saw the pendant. I saw Miriam's face. And I saw you terrified, not ambitious. I believed that. I still do, but belief is not the same as certainty. So I kept you close, and I watched." Nyasha stared at him. Watched. The word hurt because it was true. Because beneath the marriage, beneath the protection and the danger, there had been scrutiny. Testing. Measuring. She laughed softly again, but this time there was no disbelief in it. Only pain. "So I was both wife and evidence." A long silence. Then he answered with brutal honesty. "At first, yes." The words landed like a slap. Nyasha turned away at once, staring out at the city, because looking at him had become impossible for one moment. Her throat burned. Her eyes stung. She hated herself for how much that admission mattered. And now she asked. He did not answer immediately. When he finally spoke, his voice had changed. "Now you are the first person in years whose fear did not smell like performance." Nyasha closed her eyes. That was the closest thing to vulnerability he had yet given her, and it struck harder than any polished declaration could have. He stepped nearer, not touching, never suddenly touching, but close enough that she felt the gravity of him. "I do not know how to do this well," he said. "I know how to protect. I know how to investigate. I know how to survive inside rooms full of betrayal. But I do not know how to ask someone to trust me while standing in the middle of a lie I helped create. That, more than anything, made her look at him again, because for the first time he sounded tired. Not weak, not broken. Just tired in a way only deeply lonely people ever sounded. Nyasha's voice came softer despite herself. Then do not ask for trust like it is owed. A muscle moved in his jaw. Fair. Earn it. Something passed between them then, not peace, not yet, but the first fragile outline of terms both could live with. A phone rang sharply in the corridor behind them. Tafadzwa answered at once. Nyasha watched his face change as he listened. What happened? He said. A pause. Then colder. Where is she now? Nyasha felt dread rise. He ended the call and looked at her. My Rudo is missing. The world stopped. For one impossible second, Nyasha did not understand the words, only the shape of them. Then meaning rushed in and knocked the air out of her body. What Tinash went home from school? The room was open. Neighbors say a dark car was seen outside an hour ago. Nyasha's hand flew to her mouth. No, no, no! Tafadzwa caught her shoulders before she fell, then seemed to remember himself, and released her instantly. But the brief contact had already happened, shocking both of them. His voice became iron. This is no longer a warning. It is war. And for the first time since the ballroom, Nyasha understood that the people fighting to bury the truth had finally chosen the one target guaranteed to break her. Nyasha did not remember leaving the glass corridor. One moment she was standing beneath a clean blue Harare sky framed by expensive architecture, and the next she was in motion, the world reduced to fragments. Tafadzwa speaking into his phone in clipped commands, Elias barking for drivers and security, Mr. Bavuma stepping aside with the instinct of a man who knew legal order had just been outrun by blood urgency. My Rudo is missing. The sentence tore through every other thought. Not the necklace, not the marriage, not the photographs, not inheritance, not scandals, not the Moyo Empire. Nothing mattered except the image that had exploded in Nyasha's mind the moment she heard it. My Rudo's thin hands, still gentle despite illness, fumbling with medicine packets in the one-room house. The curtain at the doorway, the cracked enamel basin, the little stove. Tinash coming home from school and finding absence instead of safety. Nyasha's breathing turned sharp. This is my fault, she said, and hated how small her voice sounded. This is happening because of me. No, Tafadzwa said immediately. They were already inside the elevator. Elias had stayed behind to coordinate other measures. 2 security men stood at the rear, discreet and heavily armed beneath tailored jackets. The lift doors slid closed, sealing them into mirrored tension. Nyasha shook her head. If I had never been at that hotel, they would still have needed you, Tafadzwa said. That does not change anything. It changes the truth. The elevator descended in a silence, full of machinery and panic. Nyasha stared at the floor because if she looked up she might break apart too early. Tafadzwa's reflection in the mirrored wall looked carved from winter, controlled, precise, dangerous. But there was something else in it now, too, a heat beneath the ice. Not panic, something harder. Resolve sharpened into wrath. When the doors opened, he moved first. By the time they reached the underground garage, 3 black vehicles were already waiting. Men with earpieces moved at speed. Orders were relayed. Doors opened. Engines started. Whatever else Tafadzwa Moyo was, he was a man built for moments when hesitation cost lives. Nyasha was guided into the rear of the lead car. Tafadzwa got in beside her and shut the door himself. The convoy surged out. Harare blurred around them in flashes of color and tension, vendors at intersections, Buses painted with dust and prayer slogans, pedestrians cutting between traffic glass towers giving way to crowded streets, and then poorer neighborhoods, where every building looked as though it had learned endurance the hard way. Nyasha's nails dug into her palms until half-moons formed. "Tanash," she said suddenly. "Where is Tanash? He is with my security team now," Tafadzwa replied. "He was found at a neighbor's shop. He is frightened, but unharmed." Nyasha closed her eyes. For one painful second, relief flooded so hard it became dizziness. Then fear returned with twice the force. And my Rudo Tafadzwa did not answer quickly enough. Nyasha turned. "Tell me. We do not know yet." She laughed once in horror. "That is not something to say calmly." His jaw tightened. "I am not calm." That was true. She heard it now. His voice was controlled, yes, but the control was thinner than before, stretched over something fierce. The phone in his hand vibrated. He answered at once. "Speak." A male voice crackled through, too faint for Nyasha to make out words. Tafadzwa listened, then said, "Lock the neighborhood down quietly. No uniforms. I do not want them spooked before we understand the route." He ended the call. Nyasha stared at him. Route. Whoever took her used a dark sedan with false plates. It was seen heading south before cutting off the main road. That usually means a transfer point. The clinical clarity of it made her feel ill. How do you know these things? Because people with money commit crimes like businessmen. Efficiently. The car hit a pothole. Nyasha barely felt it. In her head, memories of my Rudo came in painful pieces. A cough hidden behind a smile. A hand on Nyasha's cheek after long shifts. The way she always said, "We may be poor, but we are not empty." The way she never answered certain questions. The way her eyes used to go distant when Nyasha asked where she had really come from. Suddenly another thought struck. What if she knew this would happen? Nyasha whispered. Tafadzwa looked at her. What if she kept quiet because she was afraid of these people? What if they're taking her because she knows something? "That is likely," he said. Nyasha's eyes burned. "Likely it means they are afraid she may talk. That does not make me feel better." It should not. The honesty of that answer cut through her panic like cold metal. Mini-climax. He was done cushioning truth. The war had moved too close now. The convoy turned off the main road and entered the neighborhood where Nyasha lived. Everything inside her clenched at once. Home looked exactly as it always had. Narrow lanes, patched roofs, children too curious to stay inside, women pausing in doorways, men pretending not to stare at the convoy while staring with everything they had. But now the familiar had been poisoned by violation. Nyasha saw the open doorway before the car stopped. She was out before security could advise caution. Nyasha Tafadzwa snapped. She ignored him and ran. Their one-room house felt wrong the instant she entered. The room was too still. The curtain had been torn partly from one hook. One stool lay on its side. My Rudo's medicine packets had spilled across the floor beside a metal cup tipped over near the bed. Nyasha dropped to her knees. "My," she whispered, as if the room might answer. Behind her came the measured entry of security boots, then Tafadzwa, then Tinasha's voice from outside, high-panicked, desperate. "Nyasha." She turned just as her younger brother rushed in past one of the guards and threw himself at her. Tinash was trembling. His school shirt was half untucked, his eyes red-rimmed from shock and crying. Nyasha wrapped both arms around him and held on as if his bones themselves were proof something still remained. "I'm here," she said, though the words were broken by her own breathing. "I'm here." "They took her," he choked out. "The neighbor said men came with a car and Nyasha." "I wasn't here. I wasn't here. It is not your fault. I should have come home sooner. It is not your fault." She pulled back and held his face between both hands. He looked so young in that moment that grief nearly swallowed her. Tinashe had been trying to become a man too early because poverty always pushed boys toward adulthood before mercy could intervene. Tafadzwa stood a few feet away, saying nothing. He let them have the moment. Then his eyes moved across the room with ruthless focus. "Do not touch anything else," he said. Nyasha looked up sharply. "What?" He crossed to the bed and crouched near the spilled medicine. Beside the fallen packets was a folded piece of paper partly hidden under the metal cup. Nyasha had been too shattered to notice it. Tafadzwa picked it up carefully. The note contained only one line, handwritten in black ink. If the false bride wants her mother, she should stop digging where dead women buried their lies. Nyasha's blood went cold. Tinashe stared. What does that mean? Nyasha could not answer. Tafadzwa unfolded this paper completely and turned it over. On the back was a mark, a crest stamped faintly in gold, half-smudged, but still visible. Elias Moyo's company crest. For 1 second, rage and confusion collided so violently inside Nyasha that she could not think straight. "They're using your family name," she said. Tafadzwa's face hardened into something lethal. "No, they are weaponizing it." Outside, one of the security men called from the doorway. "Sir." Tafadzwa stepped out briefly. Nyasha heard low voices, clipped words, then his reply, "Bring her in." A moment later, Chippo entered the house. Nyasha rose, instantly stunned. What is she doing here? Chippo looked different outside the estate, less ceremonial, more real. Her navy uniform had been replaced with practical dark clothing, her expression stripped of household neutrality. She carried a tablet and a sealed envelope. "I came because the note confirms what I feared," she said. Tafadzwa turned to Nyasha. "Listen to her." Nyasha almost laughed from disbelief. "The woman who said she hadn't decided whether to help me." Chippo met her gaze evenly. "I decided." Then she placed the envelope on the table. Inside were photocopies of old payroll records, staff movement logs from the Moyo estate, and one document that made Tafadzwa go utterly still. A transfer authorization signed years ago by Miriam Moyo and countersigned by Simba Gwedu. Destination, St. Augustine Private Hospital. Nyasha's breath caught. Chippo spoke with quiet force, now no longer a servant delivering tea, but a witness stepping into danger. "I worked in the West Administrative Wing 15 years ago," she said. "Not as house staff, as record support. I saw payments routed through domestic accounts that had no domestic purpose. I also saw your mother's personal files removed after her death." Tafadzwa's voice dropped. "Why say nothing until now?" Chippo's answer was immediate. "Because men and women who erase children do not hesitate to erase servants." The room held that truth in silence. Then she looked at Nyasha. "Last night I heard Miriam call someone after the gala," she said. "She said, 'If the village woman reaches the lawyer before the board moves, bring in the mother.'" Tinashe made a broken sound beside Nyasha. Nyasha's hands curled into fists. Everything inside her shifted. Not just fear now. Anger. Clear, focused, clean. No more confusion about whether she was merely trapped in someone else's war. Her family had been touched. That changed the nature of everything. Tafadzwa saw it happen in her face. He stepped closer. "We have enough to move against them publicly if we act fast." Nyasha turned to him slowly. "No," she said. He frowned. "No, they want panic. They want us reacting in straight lines." Her voice steadied with each word. "If Miriam took my Rudo, because she thinks my Rudo still has something, some knowledge, some memory, some piece of proof, then she has not finished with her yet." Tafadzwa studied her. Nyasha continued the shape of the strategy forming, even as pain pressed on her ribs. "So we stop chasing only with cars and guards. We force them into the open." "How?" he asked. She looked at the crest on the note. At the spilled medicine. At the transfer paper. At her brother's frightened face. At the small room where the poor had always been expected to stay, powerless and grateful for scraps. Then she answered. "We go where they believe they are strongest," she said, "and we destroy the lie in front of everyone." Tafadzwa held her gaze for one charged second. Then, very slightly, he nodded. Another mini-climax. Not because the danger was gone, because, for the first time, Nyasha was no longer merely being protected. She was choosing to fight. And somewhere beyond the walls of the room, in boardrooms and polished houses and carefully hidden accounts, the people who had stolen her past had no idea that the waitress they meant to terrify had just become the most dangerous witness of all. By nightfall, Harare was no longer discussing a scandal. It was choosing sides. Screens across the city replayed the ballroom footage in endless loops, Nyasha falling. The stunned silence, Tafadzwa Moyo's impossible declaration. Then came the next wave, anonymous leaks, half-truths, hotel stills. The phrase false bride crawling through headlines with the lazy cruelty of people who enjoyed watching the poor be dragged in public. But a second narrative had begun to rise beneath it. Questions about missing medical records. Questions about the late Mrs. Moyo. Questions about why the Moyo Group Emergency Board session originally scheduled for the following week had suddenly been moved to that very evening. That move told Tafadzwa everything. "They're afraid," he said. They were back at the Moyo estate, though this time Nyasha no longer felt like an accidental prisoner wandering inside someone else's maze. She stood in a private strategy room off Tafadzwa's study, surrounded by printed records, legal notes, security reports, copies of the hospital documents Chippo had brought, and the cruel little note left in her home. Tinash had been placed in the safest guest suite under constant guard. Elias was downstairs meeting with 2 external counsel teams. Mr. Bavuma had already prepared injunction drafts and criminal referral language. Chippo moved in and out of the room quietly, no longer pretending neutrality. And Tafadzwa had changed. Not softened, sharpened. He stood at the long table in a dark suit, with the jacket-removed sleeves rolled once at the forearms, staring down at the evidence, as though memorizing the exact order in which his enemies would fall. Nyasha looked at the board notice projected on the screen. Emergency Governance Session. 7:30 p.m. Moyo Group Headquarters. She understood immediately. They want to remove you before you can speak. Yes, and if they remove you, they control the internal investigation. Yes, they can call everything revenge, or instability, or a breakdown after a public scandal. His mouth hardened. Yes. The repetition should have made her feel hopeless. Instead, it clarified the battlefield. This was no longer a secret war in hallways and family dining rooms. This was power moving in its natural habitat, procedural language, polished betrayal votes disguised as responsibility. Nyasha touched the edge of the old photograph, the woman in the hospital bed, the infant with the pendant. "And if we go public tonight," Tafadzwa looked at her, "then they lose the privilege of handling this quietly." Good. A faint shift crossed his face at that word. Good. Not safe. Not gentle. Good. Because in truth, Nyasha no longer wanted quiet. Quiet was where poor people disappeared. Quiet was where records were altered, and women were buried under the word accident. Quiet was what had protected everyone except the innocent. Elias entered the room without knocking. His face looked like stone under tired flesh. The board has numbers, but not certainty. Miriam and Simba are pushing hard. They claim Tafadzwa's judgment is compromised by emotional attachment and media pressure. Nyasha laughed once bitterly. Emotional attachment. That's almost funny. Elias did not smile. They're also suggesting you were planted. Tafadzwa's eyes flashed. By whom? They are careful not to say directly, but the implication is clear. An opportunist coached by outside interests exploited your mother's history to trap you publicly. Nyasha felt heat rise through her body. All her life, other people had written simple stories about girls like her. Poor meant desperate. Desperate meant dishonest. Honest suffering was never dramatic enough for the rich. They always needed the poor to become schemers in order to justify their own cruelty. "Then let them say it to my face," she said. Elias studied her for a second longer than before. His gaze had changed over the course of the day. She saw it now. Not complete trust. Not yet. But no longer the detached weighing of a liability. Something closer to reluctant respect. "They may," he said. "Good," Nyasha said again. "Mini-climax." Tafadzwa turned to Elias. "Has there been any movement on my Rudo?" A shadow crossed Elias's features. "One possible sighting at an old company storage site south of the industrial district." Nothing confirmed. Nyasha's stomach clenched. Tafadzwa stepped closer to the table. "We move in after the board meeting?" After she asked sharply. His gaze met hers. "If we strike too soon and miss, they relocate her. If we force exposure first, their options narrow." She hated that he was right. She hated even more that strategy now required her to think like him. Chipo entered carrying a slim folder and set it beside Nyasha. "You should see this." Inside was a copy of one of Tafadzwa's mother's handwritten notes recovered from a digital archive Elias had managed to pull from an old assistant's backup drive. The ink had faded, but one line remained painfully legible. "If the child lives, they will fear her more as a woman than they ever feared her as an infant, because an infant cannot testify." Nyasha read the line twice, then a third time. Something inside her went very still. Not because the note frightened her, because it named her, not by face, not by certainty, but by possibility, by value, by danger to those who had profited from burying her. Tafadzwa watched her read it. "You can stay here tonight," he said quietly. She looked up. "And let them speak for me in that room. It will be hostile." "So," his expression tightened. "So I do not want you walking into a room full of people who may have built their lives on harming yours?" Nyasha held his gaze. "Then they should be the ones afraid to see me." The silence that followed was brief, taut, electric. Tafadzwa looked at her as if re-evaluating the scale of something. Then very slightly he nodded. Elias exhaled through his nose. "If she appears with us, Miriam will either over-control or overreact." "Either is useful," Tafadzwa said. Chipo added, "And the press will already be watching the building." Nyasha closed the folder. "Then I'm going." No one argued again. Moyo Group headquarters at night looked like power trying to pass itself off as architecture. Glass, steel, security, light poured across the plaza in clean, expensive lines. Black vehicles rolled to the private entrance, while reporters clustered behind barriers, microphones raised camera lights sharp as interrogation. The moment Tafadzwa's car arrived, the atmosphere changed. Questions burst at once. "Mr. Moyo, is the marriage legal? Who is the woman with you? Are the fraud allegations true? Is it true your board may remove you tonight?" Nyasha stepped out beside Tafadzwa before any handler could shield her. The cameras found her instantly. Flash after flash exploded across the dark. For one violent second, she almost faltered. She was wearing a simple, deep blue dress, chosen quickly from the estate wardrobe, her hair pulled back cleanly, the old pendant visible at her throat. She looked nothing like a polished society wife. Good. Let them see the truth of where she came from. Let them choke on it. A reporter shouted, "Miss Nyasha, were you planted to seduce the CEO?" Tafadzwa moved, but Nyasha spoke first. "No," she said clearly. "But I am beginning to believe someone was planted to destroy me." The reporters erupted. Another mini-climax. Tafadzwa's head turned toward her, surprised only for an instant. Good, she thought again. Let even him be surprised tonight. They entered the building under a storm of noise. Inside, the executive floor glowed with unnatural calm. Carpeted corridors swallowed sound. Reception staff kept professional smiles pinned over fear. At the far end of the boardroom hall stood Miriam Moyo and Simba Gwedu, waiting like hosts at a funeral they believed they controlled. Miriam wore white. Nyasha noticed the choice immediately and despised its elegance. White for innocence, white for image, white for the performance of moral cleanliness. Simba stood beside her in a dark suit, his broad face arranged into solemn concern. Concerned men in expensive clothes were among the most dangerous creatures Nyasha had ever met. Miriam's gaze landed on Nyasha and stayed there. "You brought her," she said to Tafadzwa. Tafadzwa's answer was ice. "You seem disappointed." Miriam's smile appeared too polished to be sincere. "Only surprised. I did not expect you to deepen a mistake." Nyasha stepped forward before Tafadzwa could answer, "And I did not expect a woman dressed in white to be so comfortable around stolen children and dead mothers." Silence. It hit the corridor like a dropped blade. Simba's expression changed first, just a flicker, but enough. Miriam's came second. Her smile held, but every bit of warmth fell out of it. "Careful," Miriam said softly. "No," Nyasha replied. "Not anymore." The boardroom doors opened behind them. Executives' council and senior observers turned toward the hall. Word had already spread that something larger than governance was unfolding tonight. Even before anyone took their seats, tension filled the room so densely it felt physical. Elias moved to the head of the table but did not sit. As chairman, he said, "I will begin this session with one amendment. Before governance matters are heard, we will address newly surfaced evidence of internal criminal exposure connected to historic medical records and the late Mrs. Moyo." Shock rippled around the table. Simba stood at once. "That is improper. This session was called regarding executive instability." "It was called?" Elias said louder now, because certain people rushed to contain the truth before it reached daylight. Murmurs broke out. Council whispered. Two board members exchanged alarmed looks. Miriam did not move. Nyasha stood near Tafadzwa, pulse-hammering pendant cool against her skin. This was it. No more hidden corridors, no more private warnings. Tafadzwa placed both hands on the back of his chair, but remained standing. "You wanted a session on judgment?" he said to the room. "Good. Let us discuss the judgment of those who routed company funds through medical channels 18 years ago, altered hospital records, suppressed witness files after my mother's death, and attempted this morning to intimidate the surviving witness through the abduction of her mother." The room exploded. What abduction witness to what? Simba slammed a hand on the table. "This is outrageous." Tafadzwa turned to him with terrifying calm. "Yes," he said, "it is." Then Nyasha lifted her chin, looked around the table at all the polished faces that had once decided her kind were voiceless, and spoke into the chaos. "My name is Nyasha," she said, "and I think some of you have been afraid of me since before I knew my own story." The room fell into a silence so complete it was almost hunger, and in that silence, for the first time in her life, Nyasha did not feel small. She felt dangerous. The silence after Nyasha spoke did not feel empty. It felt loaded, like a courtroom just before a verdict. Around the boardroom table, the most powerful men and women in Moyo Group sat motionless, each one measuring the distance between private sin and public ruin. Some looked confused. Some looked offended. Some had already begun the cold inward retreat of people calculating legal exposure. But the faces that mattered most were Miriam Moyo's and Simba Gwedu's. Simba recovered first. He gave a short, incredulous laugh and spread his hands as if the whole thing were beneath reason. "This is madness. A frightened girl makes a dramatic statement and suddenly we are supposed to believe the board is sitting on kidnapping, medical fraud, and murder. No, Tafadzwa said. You are sitting on the consequences of them. His voice cut cleanly through the room. Elias remained standing at the head of the table, no longer looking like a chairman trying to preserve order. He looked like a father standing too late in the wreckage of things he should have confronted years earlier. Sit down, Simba, Elias said. But Simba did not sit. Instead, he leaned forward, palms on the polished table, and turned to the others with practiced outrage. This is exactly what I warned against. Tafadzwa is compromised. He has entangled himself with a woman whose background is unknown, whose story changes by the hour, and now he is trying to drag this company through a public trial in order to protect his own scandal. Nyasha felt every word like spit. Unknown background, woman, scandal. That was how men like Simba cleaned blood from their hands. They reduced a life to a category, and then discredited the category. Before Tafadzwa could answer, Nyasha stepped forward. My background is unknown, she said, because someone made it unknown. Her voice rang harder now. You say that like it shames me. It does not. It shames the people who stole records, buried names, and thought poverty would make me too small to matter. Several board members lowered their eyes. Mini-climax. Not because they believed everything yet, because shame had entered the room and shame always made cowards restless. Miriam finally rose. She did it slowly, elegantly, like a woman refusing to be rushed by chaos. White silk, perfect posture, cold eyes. This is all very emotional, she said, looking first at Nyasha, then at Tafadzwa, then at the room. And that is precisely why it is dangerous. A young woman arrives from nowhere. My stepson, who has always struggled with unresolved grief, becomes obsessed with a necklace and a fantasy about the past. Suddenly, every old wound is reopened, every coincidence becomes conspiracy, and this company is expected to collapse under the weight of imagination. Nyasha's nails bit into her palms. There it was. The real weapon. Not denial of facts. Pathologizing truth. Calling grief insanity. Calling memory obsession. Calling a poor woman's existence imagination. Tafadzwa's expression went still. In that frightening way Nyasha now understood meant destruction was close. But Elias moved first. This is not imagination, he said. He lifted the file from the table and removed 3 documents with hands that no longer trembled. A hospital transfer note with altered identifiers, a payment trail routed through Makoni Community Holdings, a personnel authorization signed by you and Simba Gwedu. He set each page down one after another, and a handwritten note from my late wife referencing a female child hidden to protect inheritance lines. Murmurs tore through the room. One board member, a middle-aged woman with silver glasses, leaned forward sharply. You authenticated these. Mr. Bavuma, seated along the legal wall, answered at once. Enough for emergency preservation orders and criminal referral requests, yes. Simba's face darkened. Those documents prove nothing on their own. Then perhaps this will help. All heads turned. Chippo entered the boardroom. She had not been announced. She simply crossed the threshold with the quiet certainty of someone who had spent too many years invisible and had finally decided visibility was worth the risk. In her hand was a slim black device connected to the room system by cable. Miriam's face changed. Only a little. But Nyasha saw it, and so did Tafadzwa. Chippo, Miriam said softly, almost gently. This is an executive session. Chippo met her gaze without flinching. Not anymore. She handed the device to Mr. Bavuma, who connected it to the central screen. An audio file opened. Tafadzwa looked at Nyasha once briefly, then nodded for it to play. The room filled with static, then voices. The first voice was Miriam's. Even through compression and background noise, it was unmistakable. If the village woman reaches the lawyer before the board moves, bring in the mother. No one in the room breathed. The second voicemail, lower and rougher, answered. "Alive!" Miriam's reply came without hesitation. For now. She remembers too little, but fear may loosen what loyalty did not. Nyasha's knees nearly gave way. My Rudo. For now. The boardroom seemed to tilt. Simba lunged verbally before the shock could settle. This is fabricated. Edited. It means nothing. Mr. Bavuma's tone remained dry and lethal. The metadata has already been preserved and duplicated. I would not recommend staking your future on that claim. A board member near the end of the table stood abruptly. Are we to understand, he said, staring at Miriam, that you authorized the kidnapping of a civilian connected to an ongoing identity matter tied to this company? Miriam did not answer immediately, and that silence condemned her more than words could have. Then the mask slipped. Only for a second, but enough. The maternal calm vanished. The social elegance cracked. In its place appeared the harder, older thing, beneath the will that had protected itself for years by smiling over graves. You all act shocked now, she said quietly. How convenient. None of you objected when survival required unpleasant decisions. The room recoiled. Elias stared at her, as if seeing not merely betrayal, but its age. What did you do? He asked. Her gaze snapped to him. What was necessary? Tafadzwa stepped around his chair. Necessary for whom Miriam looked at him with something that was almost pity. For the family, she said. For the company. For the line that could actually be protected. Nyasha felt the answer before she fully understood it. Inheritance. Line. Protected. Miriam was not simply covering a crime. She was confessing motive. Tafadzwa's voice dropped into something terrible. Say it clearly. Miriam held his stare. If that child had been acknowledged, she said, your father's promises would have changed. The foundation structure, the private holdings, the succession assumptions, everything would have shifted because your mother had become sentimental about blood she should never have touched. A sound escaped Ilias, then not loud, not dramatic, just human and devastated. Nyasha understood all at once. She was not a random child hidden for convenience. She was a threat someone had calculated. Not because she was loved, because she was evidence, because her existence touched money, legacy, and power. Simba straightened, panic now flickering beneath his outrage. Miriam, stop talking. But Miriam was beyond recovery. No, she said. Let them hear it. Let them all hear what this empire was built on. Cowards in tailored suits pretending innocence because a woman did the dirty part for them. Several executives erupted at once. This is criminal call security. Call the police now. Where is the mother? Nyasha barely heard them. Her blood roared in her ears. My Rudo was still alive. Miriam's words had made that much clear. Alive and being held because she might remember. Tafadzwa turned to security at the door. Detain Simba Gwedu. No one leaves this floor. Simba moved instantly, knocking back his chair. One of the guards intercepted him, but not before he slammed an elbow into the man's jaw and bolted toward the side exit. Chaos exploded. Chairs scraped. Voices shouted. Another guard lunged. Tafadzwa moved faster than Nyasha had ever seen, cutting across the room with terrifying speed. He caught Simba at the side doors just as the man shoved one open. The two men hit the wall hard enough to shake the glass. Simba swung wildly. Tafadzwa absorbed the first blow, ducked the second, and drove him back with one brutal strike to the ribs that folded all his outrage into pain. The room froze around the violence. Untouchable did not mean weak. It meant controlled. And Tafadzwa's control, when finally used, was merciless. Security closed in and pinned Simba to the floor. At the head of the table, Miriam stood utterly still, her face pale now, not from guilt, but from the sudden realization that her years of calculation had finally outrun her influence. Nyasha stepped toward her. No one stopped her. How many times, Nyasha asked, her voice shaking with contained fury. "Did you call me nothing before tonight?" Miriam said nothing. Nyasha came closer. "You saw a child and turned her into paperwork. You saw a sick woman raising her and turned her into leverage. You saw grief in your own house and fed on it, and you still wore white." That last sentence cut deeper than shouting could have. For the first time, Miriam looked away. Sirens sounded faintly outside. Police, legal teams, the world arriving. Elias sank slowly into his chair, as though age had reached him all at once. He covered his mouth with one hand. When he spoke, the words were hoarse. "Where is my Rudo?" Miriam did not answer. Chippo did. "The old Southridge storage compound," she said. "The same site used years ago for records transfer before archives went digital. I heard the location in the call, but waited for confirmation." Tafadzwa was already moving. He turned to Nyasha. "You stay here." "No, it is not safe. Neither was my life before I knew any of you." The reply hit like iron. He stared at her for one long second, then made the decision. "Then you stay with me, at all times." They left the boardroom in a storm of motion, security, police, legal orders, flashing phones, shouted instructions. The elevators felt too slow, the garage too far. Nyasha's heartbeat became one hard demand. Alive. Please let her still be alive. The convoy tore through the city. Southridge sat on the edge of old industrial land, where disused warehouses and forgotten company sheds had outlived their paperwork. Rusted gates, broken fencing, black windows. The compound looked like the kind of place secrets were brought to decay. Police units were already converging when Tafadzwa's lead car arrived. He got out first. Nyasha was a step behind him before anyone could protest. Inside the main storage building, the air smelled of dust, hot metal, and stale damp. Flashlights cut through shadow. Crates stood stacked like coffins. Somewhere deeper inside came a weak sound, a cough. Nyasha ran. Nyasha Tafadzwa called, but he followed. They found Mai Rudo in a small office space at the back, bound to a chair, but conscious, one cheek bruised, her breathing ragged but steady. An older man stood near the door, reaching for something metallic at his waist, too slow. Police tackled him before he could raise it. Mai Nyasha fell to her knees. Mai Rudo's eyes opened wider through pain and exhaustion. "My child!" Nyasha's hands shook as she helped cut the restraints. "I'm here. I'm here." Mai Rudo touched her face as if confirming she was real. Then her gaze lifted past her to Tafadzwa, and something changed. Recognition. Old, frightened recognition. "Tafadzwa," she whispered. He crouched beside them. "You know me." Tears filled Mai Rudo's eyes. "I knew your mother," she said. "She begged me to run." Nyasha stared. What Mai Rudo wept now, openly, every year of silence breaking at once. "She found out what they meant to do with you," she said, gripping Nyasha's hand. "She said the baby had to disappear before dawn, or the wrong people would own her life forever. She gave me the pendant and money, and told me not to use your real name. I was meant to keep moving. I was meant never to tell you unless the truth came looking for you first." Nyasha could not breathe. Tafadzwa went still beside her. "And your mother?" he asked. Mai Rudo closed her eyes in grief. By the next week she was dead. The world narrowed to pain, truth, and the unbearable tenderness of people who had tried to protect what power wanted, erased. Nyasha bent over Mai Rudo and cried for the first time without restraint. Not just from fear, from the weight of being found by her own story. Later, after arrests, after statements, after ambulances, after Elias arrived at the compound, looking like a man who would never again confuse silence with order, the dawn began to lighten the edge of Harare. And in that pale first light outside the storage building where lies had finally failed, Tafadzwa stood facing Nyasha with no boardroom between them. No cameras, no audience, only truth. The first marriage, he said quietly, was a shield. Necessary, but still a shield. Nyasha looked at him through tired eyes. Yes, I will not defend that part. She waited. He took one step closer. Nothing hurried, nothing assumed. But what stands here now, he said, voice lower, stripped of all performance, is not duty, not investigation, not strategy. You changed the shape of a house built on fear. You made me speak plainly when I had almost forgotten how. And if you walk away from me, after everything I will endure it. But if you stay, Nyasha, then stay because this time you choose me freely. The sunrise touched his face. For the first time since she had known him, he looked like a man and not a fortress. Nyasha thought of the ballroom, the trap, the cold contract, the secrets, the war, the mother who had raised her, the mother who had died protecting her, the boy she still needed to help grow safely, the man before her flawed and fierce and slowly learning that protection without truth became another kind of prison. Then she gave him the answer he had finally earned. I will not stay because I was chosen in public, she said softly. I will stay because I am choosing in daylight. Something in him broke open then, quietly, but unmistakably. When he reached for her this time, it was not as a strategist, not as a CEO, not as a man grabbing control before someone else could take it. It was as Tafadzwa. And when Nyasha placed her hand in his, the gesture healed more than the scandal that had begun them. Weeks later, a second wedding took place, not in a ballroom poisoned by ambition, but in a private garden at the restored east wing of the Moyo estate, reopened not as a mausoleum of grief, but as a place of memory and renewal. Mai Rudo sat in the front row, frailer, but smiling through tears. Tinashe stood proudly at Nyasha's side. Elias attended in humbled silence. Chipo stood where all could see her, no longer hidden in service. Miriam and Simba were absent for the simplest reason in the world: justice had finally learned their names. This time no one whispered false bride. This time Tafadzwa looked at Nyasha before witnesses and vows and future, and nothing in his face was hidden. When he touched her cheek, the moment held its own miracle. Not because a man who never touched women had finally touched one, but because he had learned that love was not contamination. And Nyasha, who had once been reduced to accident, scandal, and mystery, stood fully seen, not erased, not borrowed, not hidden, chosen and choosing. Life does not always destroy us with open cruelty. Sometimes it wounds us through silence, secrecy, and the lies powerful people decide are necessary. Nyasha's story is a reminder that truth can be delayed, buried, manipulated, and mocked, but it can still survive in the hands of those who refuse to let injustice define them. She was called poor, shameless, false, and dangerous. Yet in the end, the only thing truly dangerous was the truth she carried simply by existing. This story also reminds us that love alone is not enough if it is built on fear, control, or half-truths. Tafadzwa had to learn that protection without honesty becomes another kind of cage. Nyasha had to learn that being wounded by betrayal does not mean she must live forever in hiding. Healing began only when both of them stopped performing strength and started choosing truth even when truth cost them comfort. And perhaps that is the deepest lesson of all family, is not only blood, wealth, or name. Family is the person who protects your life when others want your silence. Family is the one who tells the truth when lying would be easier. Family is the one who stays when the world turns cruel. If this story moved you, tell me in the comments which moment hit you the hardest And what would you have done in Nyasha's place, and where are you watching from today? Drop your country and local time below. If you enjoy emotional stories filled with shocking twists, justice healing, and unforgettable endings, subscribe and stay with me for the next story.